Hello. Hi, welcome. My name is Michael Locher. I'm the Director of Design here at the Alley Theater. And welcome to tonight's wonderful engagement with our friends at Inprint. Yes, sure, of course. The Alley Theater, for those of you who don't know, was founded in 1947. And in the years since, it has become one of the largest nonprofit theater companies outside of New York City, which we're very proud of. We have, yes, thank you. A typical year for us includes no fewer than 11 productions over the course of the season. And those are split, of course, between our two stages, the Newhouse Theater downstairs, and this right here, which is the Hubbard Theater. And as you can tell, it's an exciting moment here on the Hubbard. I'm standing here on the set for our beautiful production of August Wilson's Fences, the Pulitzer and Tony award-winning play, by the late, great August Wilson. Our production is directed by Eileen Morris from the ensemble, yes, of course, from the Ensemble Theater here in Houston. We're incredibly proud of it. I hope you come and catch a performance. We've also just announced our 80th season here at the Alley Theater. So please, I would love to see each and every one of you, if possible, catch a performance. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the evening over to our friends at Inprint. I'm looking forward to this as much as you are.
Well, hello, everyone. And we are always happy to be here at the Alley Theater. It's really a joy and a privilege to be on this stage. So thank you. Thank you, Michael. Welcome to the 2025-2026 Inprint Margaret Root Brown Reading Series, our 45th season. Tonight, we are thrilled to present Booker Prize-winning author Yann Martel with his new novel, Son of Nobody. We're also delighted that our good friend Maggie Galehouse will be tonight's conversationalist. Thanks to all of you for joining us here at the Alley Theater to celebrate and savor the power of storytelling. My name is Rich Levy, and although my time at Inprint is drawing to a close after 31 years, I will give this introduction tonight and next week's as well to finish the season. And in the meantime, it's my pleasure to introduce Inprint's new executive director, Giuseppe Torino. Giuseppe is a seasoned leader with experience in arts and academic administration, most recently at Writers in the Schools, and he's no stranger to Inprint. He came to Houston in 2003 for his MFA in fiction at the UH Creative Writing Program, where he received an Inprint Brown Foundation Fellowship. He won an Inprint Donald Barthelme Prize in fiction, and he taught Inprint Writers Workshops. Obviously, he's come full circle, and we're thrilled to have him at the helm. So come say hello after the reading. Since 1980, the Inprint Brown Reading Series has presented more than 400 terrific writers from 40 countries, including winners of 13 Nobel Prizes, 74 Pulitzer Prizes, 71 National Book Awards, tonight 20 Booker Prizes, as well as 23 U.S. Poets Laureate. Giuseppe, Deputy Director Krupa Parikh, and I are working on next season's roster. Stay tuned, and thank you for joining us on the journey. Next Monday, May 4th, here at the Alley, we close the season with 2 more great Inprint Fellows and prize winners and their acclaimed new books. Poet Brittany Ray Crowell with her debut collection, Cordswell, and fiction writer Nina McConaughey with her debut novel, How to Commit a Post-Colonial Murder. Come see. A. Van Jordan calls Cordswell a stunning debut, and Megha Majumdar calls McConaughey's novel spirited and witty, stylish and audacious. They'll be in conversation with UH Creative Writing Program co-director and Texas Poet Laureate Kevin Proofer. Another full circle moment. Hope you can join us for this special occasion. General admission tickets and info are at inprint.org. Just a few other announcements. The Inprint Book Club focuses on books by authors in this series. On May 17th, on Zoom, we'll discuss Now I Surrender by Alvaro Enrique. We also present the Inprint Cool Brains series featuring the nation's leading authors for middle grade children with bus scholarships, free signed books at each event, and the Inprint Escritores en la Casa series featuring leading authors from across the Spanish-speaking world. Each year, Inprint offers more than 90 community writing workshops across the city, in English and Spanish for seniors, teachers, veterans, healthcare providers, the incarcerated, and others. Info on all this, plus the Inprint online archive of readings, the Inprint Poetry Buskers, fellowships and prizes for emerging authors, and more, is at inprint.org. Inprint receives invaluable support from the Brown Foundation. This series is named for one of its founders. The Jerry C. Deering Family Foundation, Houston Endowment, the City of Houston through the Houston Arts Alliance, and the Texas Commission on the Arts. Many thanks to WinPark, to Yann's publisher, W.W. Norton, and to Houston Dairy Maids. There's the cheese is just so good. No, they contribute cheese trays to receptions, and we just wanted to acknowledge and thank Lindsay Schechter and her crew. After Yann talks about and reads from Son of Nobody, he will join in conversation with Maggie Galehouse, an award-winning writer, editor, and researcher. Maggie was book editor at the Houston Chronicle for several years and has reported on education, crime, and business for a variety of newspapers. She's conducted memorable Inprint conversations, several on this stage, with Anthony Doerr, Lauren Groff, Maggie O'Farrell, Paul Lynch, and Adam Johnson. She currently works as a program director in the communications department at MD Anderson Cancer Center. We are grateful Maggie is with us tonight. Afterwards, Yann will meet folks and sign books in the lobby. Brazos Bookstore, our bookseller since 1980, is here tonight offering a 10% discount on copies of Sons of Nobody and online at brazosbookstore.com through Sunday. The discount code is Inprint. Yeah. We also want to thank Yann for meeting this afternoon at lunchtime with medical students at Baylor College of Medicine at the BCM Humanities Expression and Arts Lab. That kind of outreach is really wonderful. Yann Martel is the renowned Canadian author of the international bestseller Life of Pi, which the Los Angeles Times Book Review called a story to make you believe in the soul-sustaining power of fiction. Among other accolades, the novel won the Booker Prize and was made into an Academy Award-winning film by Ang Lee and a Tony Award-winning Broadway play. He's also the author of 3 other novels and a collection of stories. Tonight, Yann will share his new novel, Son of Nobody, a retelling of the Trojan War from the perspectives of both a commoner and a contemporary scholar, commoner soldier and a contemporary scholar. Praised by Booklist in a starred review as original, thought-provoking, utterly absorbing, the novel invents a heretofore undiscovered classical poem, the Soad, an epic in free verse that follows a goatherd son, Soaz of Medea, who leaves his wife and family to fight at Troy. The poem is lost until a Canadian academic who has left his wife and daughter behind to study at Oxford discovers it 3,000 years later. Told through the scholar's translation of this imagined ancient epic and his contemporary and occasionally autobiographical footnotes, like no others I know of except in the novel Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov. Son of Nobody is, according to Daniel Mendelsohn in the New York Times Book Review, the front cover review a week ago, ingenious. Martel brings a witty freshness to standard elements of Homeric narrative. The Christian Science Monitor calls it extraordinary. Martel wraps an everyman and a scholar in an epic tale. Let's give a warm Houston welcome to this innovative, thoughtful, and compelling writer, Yann Martel.
Thank you very much, Rich, and good luck, Giuseppe. You have big shoes to fill. It's wonderful being here at Inprint. I keep on thinking it's Imprint, but I don't suppose it's a 45-year-old misprint. It's really delightful being here. It's my first time in Houston, and I've been to Dallas and other places in Texas. My first time in Houston. I was supposed to arrive earlier today and go to your Museum of Fine Art, but my flight was delayed, so unfortunately I didn't, which means I'll just have to come back. Now, I'm doing something quite unusual here. I don't usually do readings. Usually I just do on-stage conversations, because I figure that's more unique. You can't, you can read the book yourself or listen to the audiobook, but Rich wanted me to read, so I will read. So I'll read for a few minutes. Now, as Rich was saying, the layout of the book is quite unusual. The top of the page is these the fragments from this lost Trojan War epic. And at the bottom of the page, and the page is divided consistently by a black line, there are footnotes. I like that mix of that means each strand has its own territory, its own life. The top of the page is the past, the bottom of the page is the present, the top of the page is this ancient verse, the bottom of the page are these little modern technical footnotes. So it's a novel in verse and footnotes. So what I thought I'd read for a few minutes is from one of the fragments. So in this story, a common foot soldier named Soaz of Medea decides to commit a folly, which is to attack one of the 50 sons of Priam, which would make no sense. A son of Priam, a son of the king of Troy, would be a highly trained soldier with the best equipment, the best training, whereas Soaz, being a commoner, would have ragtag equipment, would have no training whatsoever, or would have only on-the-job training, which could be quite short-lived when you're at war. And so it'd be crazy to take on a son of Troy. A son of the king of Troy. But he decides to do that. And at one point, if you are familiar with the Iliad, you'll see it's a madly gregarious war. They're incessantly talking to each other. It's in part because the weaponry was so harmless compared to modern weaponry today. So, how difficult is it? It's easy to avoid a spear. With a shield, you can, avoid an arrow. And archers had a very poor reputation, precisely because it was viewed to be sort of cowardly to shoot someone with an arrow. So anyway, since the weapons are relatively harmless, a very low lethality to the war, why not talk? So it's a madly gregarious and chatty war. And so this is one of these. So this is Prince Mester spends most of his time berating Soaz, but at one point he has this to say to him. So it's a fragment that the scholar Harlodun calls, Prince Mestor tells Soaz how Helen came to Troy. Said the prince to the son of nobody, beware of news that come from afar, Soaz. Your poor senses are not equipped for it. Your eyes, for example, what they take in. You can see me in front of you who shortly will kill you. You can see the fierce men around us who are killing fierce men around us. You can see the great insurmountable walls of Troy behind me, while I can make out the unkempt camp you unwashed Argives have called home for 10 years. But how much can you see beyond that? You can see usefully only about as far as an arrow can fly. After that, the world becomes a blur, the details lost. Your ears do worse than your eyes, as does your nose. Beyond a short distance, they sense nothing at all. Touch is for the blind. You must grope and fumble, while taste is a useless sense. Worse, a liar. Any news that comes from beyond the horizon can't be trusted because your senses cannot judge. It might be true, but it could just as well be false. Distance only distorts and confuses. Distance will make you believe in lies, while the truth right before your eyes is ignored. Best to trust only what is within reach of your senses, that which your brain can feed upon directly. Then you live like you should, local and content. Instead, if you feed upon the foreign, you become a stressed fool, a sleepless dolt. For example, you were tricked by your kings, not just the sons of Atreus, Menelaus and Agamemnon, but all of your kings. They plotted and took you right in at the start, and 10 years on you're still dying for their lies. Let me tell you the truth that distance has masked. This is how the story goes. This is what happened. Lord Tyndareus was king of Sparta, and a mighty and magnificent man was he. You only had to look at his 4 children to see and know what their father was like. By his queen, lovely Leda, he had 2 daughters, you know their names, Helen and Clytemnestra, and a pair of brawny twin sons, equally famed, Castor and Pollux. The 4 so dazzled mortal eyes that many suspected a god had slipped in betwixt the king and his queen. From an early age, word of Helen's beauty spread. At the sight of her, eyes froze and tongues failed. How could such fine features be, of face and figure, of voice and movement? Upon meeting her, a man was possessed by deep loneliness. Then she spoke, and he came back to joyful life. Such attention, such kindness, such humor. Now the man not only stared, but smiled with thanks. I know of what I speak. I see her every day. She is my sister-in-law, my brother's wife. Helen of Troy is the city's 2nd son. Even as a girl, she attracted suitors and problems. Once she was carried away by Theseus, king of Athens. Well, right away, without a moment's delay, her enraged brothers marched out, sacked the city, and brought her back. Tyndareus was a wise and careful man. He wed Helen's sister Clytemnestra to Agamemnon, king of Mycenae. There, the houses of Sparta and Mycenae were united in an indefectible bond. But what of ravishing Helen? Where might she go? Eager suitors traveled from far and wide, great and powerful kings all, wishing not only her, but the useful alliance with Sparta. What's the version you were made to believe? Ah, yes, Menelaus got the Spartan king's nod. To him would go the fair bride, lucky man. But think for a second, so as you witless runt. Why would Tyndareus give his last daughter to the same family from the same city, 2 brothers taking home his 2 daughters? To marry off 1 seals an alliance. To marry off 2 begs for a takeover. But so the story goes. The sons of Atreus got all the daughters of Tyndareus, and they would have lived happily ever after, if not for a dastardly Trojan prince. You were told that Paris took Helen away against her will, because why otherwise would an Argive queen flee with the umpteenth son of a barbarian king, abandoning husband, daughter, father, brothers, and country? It's all the fault of that chance-met charmer and rake. Nonsense. Do you hear me, Argive dumbhead? Nonsense. Those 2 married in good and proper wedding, with her and her royal kinsfolk's full assent. What a match! The house of Sparta and Troy were united in indefectible bond. Whatever else you've heard is lies upon lies. What, Paris arrives in a foreign city with a small retinue and abducts a king's wife? Not only that, he steals the treasury too. Not a single attendant raises the alarm. Not a single guard cracks open an eyelid. How quiet can an escaping treasury be? How quiet can an unwilling kidnapped wife be? How quiet can stolen horses and carts be? And this whole convoy stealthily gets to the coast, a trip of some 5 leagues. No one catches them? No one sets out after them on land or at sea? The story goes that Menelaus was away. How convenient. But what about Castor and Pollux? Where were her combative, protective brothers? Where are her combative, protective brothers? Why are they not at Troy? Are we to believe that for the exact same offense they would wage war against the fellow king of Athens, but nothing against the dandy prince of a lesser race? If Helen's brothers were that weak and fickle, they would not be as widely famed as they are. Then, to complete this ludicrous fable, Paris returns home and to his righteous father cheerfully announces, "My trip went very well. I was received by King Menelaus most graciously, and so when he departed in return, I absconded with his treasury. See the heavy chest there? And while at it, I also stole his hot wife. There she stands, just a little battered and bruised. In a moment I will remove her chains and hood, if not her gag, and you will see what a great cat she is." And in this fantastical version of events, King Priam, Queen Hecuba, thoughtful Hector, every brother and sister, the whole family, we all slapped Paris on the back, gleeful, and said, "Well done, good fun. Now let us prepare for a war that will likely wipe us off the face of the earth." Let me tell you what really happened, so that you might know the truth before you die. Yes, suitors from all over came to Sparta, one valorous king after another. Menelaus, Diomedes, Ajax, Idomeneus, Odysseus, besides many kings and princes from further shores. Much they feasted at Tyndareus' court, but the king was game because the cause was good. Beautiful Helen was courted by every man, each trying to win her heart and her father's nod. Then arrived Paris, with a great show of wealth, because ambassadors, as you wouldn't know, don't travel like beggars in rags, at least not prince ambassadors from sacred Troy. Right away Paris made an impression. He showered Tyndareus, Leda, Castor, Pollux, and Helen with sumptuous gifts that the other suitors together could not match. And Paris is strikingly handsome, too, graceful and unnervous, with a charming smile. I know that smile. It runs in the family. A match to Helen's incomparable beauty. That is how we like it here, to be surrounded by beauty, hence why Helen fits so well with us. While the Argive kings were all like so many grunting boars lifting their snouts from the mud, Paris was a proper prince, paying every heed, yet standing his ground, fully and naturally himself while in a foreign land. It was with ease that he slipped into the daughter's glad heart and won the king's and 2 brothers' high esteem. Tyndareus sought counsel and consulted seers. All, the words of men, the entrails of animals, the flight paths of birds, the dreams of those who see, spoke with one voice: Helen should be with Paris. The union is blessed by the gods who love peace and beauty, who love Sparta and Troy. The king himself could only see advantages. Here he was, respected and well allied, with Castor and Pollux to succeed him as mighty co-kings of Sparta, and here now was the prospect of an alliance with Priam. His power and wealth were not just fabled. Every season ships from Laconia traded with Troy to mutual benefit. And if he rejected Paris and instead gave Helen to, say, Diomedes, then what? He would have 2 neighboring sons-in-law with eyes on his throne, Agamemnon and Diomedes, with daughters pitted against daughter, because that is the scorpion way of your countrymen. Better to give no Argive suitor cause for war, and at the same time secure a powerful friend. Troy would no doubt come to Sparta's help if need be. Priam's word could be trusted, that was well known. And his daughters seemed so happy. There was that too. What a nice pair they were, the 2 of them, like 2 birds in a nest. And so the old king came to his decision, the smiles of his daughter blinding him to the scowls of her other suitors. Thank you. I'll stop there.
That was a great reading. Thank you.
Thank you.
You are reminded that you really do have to hear this, right? So when you're reading at home, feel free to read aloud or have somebody read to you. I,
Quite a bit dramatic.
very dramatic. Water pouring. I'm going to start with a big question, and then I want to talk a little bit about epic, okay? Just sort of in general. I don't know how recently everyone in the audience has read the Iliad or the Odyssey, but why now in 2026 have you decided to dust off a 3,000-year-old story and pair it with the story of a very regular person, a regular dude whose wife makes more money than him, who's in graduate school and hasn't gotten his doctorate yet, has this one chance to go to Oxford for a year, and he's just trying to make things work. Why this now?
Well, there was no decision due to time. It was just happenstance. I actually haven't read the Iliad I didn't read it until a very few years ago.
Really?
I had grown up on the Greek myths, reading retellings, Roger Lancelin Green, Edith Hamilton, any number of retellings of the Greek myths. I love them. As a child, they're so...
Edith Hamilton was the myth book that everybody read in
Yes.
America in high school, when I was in high school, a long time ago.
She was great. And she had
Yeah.
other books about the Greek myths.
Yeah.
They're wonderful retellings. So I ate that up. I really loved the Greek myths, but I never read source material just because it was in a foreign language and it seemed like it would be a hard read, so I just never read it. And I only came to it, in fact, because my partner, Alice, a few years ago said, there's a new translation that I read. She's a much more adventurous reader than I am. She said, read this one. It's by a wonderful translation that I'd recommend you by Stephen Mitchell, an American poet, who I'd already read him because he'd done a translation of Gilgamesh that I'd really liked. So she said, read this. It's a really propulsive read. So I read it, and it wasn't at all the book that I expected. The Note of Despair. It's a deeply despairing work, the Iliad. They're fighting this fruitless war where they're dying in droves. And
it's a 10-year war.
It's a 10-year
It's a
war. They're
long
all
war.
worn down. They're not going to
Yeah.
get anything out of it. The victory, it's really the defining Pyrrhic victory before that term was coined, where yes, the Greeks win, but what do they win?
They lost their civilization.
They
after
lose
they
everything.
won.
They lose
Yeah.
everything. Agamemnon goes home and is promptly assassinated. Many of the Greeks do not return home. Odysseus takes 10 years to return home. Troy is pillaged and destroyed, and they bring back very little. So it's a pointless war. And so here's this very early, literally the West's first book. And you'd think it'd be one that would say, it's great to be alive, it's great to be Greek, you should be like us, here's our happy ending. Well, it's none of that. It's a deeply despairing work. It's the Western canon starts with a point of nihilism, saying this life makes no sense. The best it gets for the Greeks, and that's what struck me, is the best it gets is if you're really a top-notch hero and you die in an act of bravery, you'll end up in the Elysian fields, which is not at all like our conception of paradise. It's a gray place where they just move around and they yearn to be alive again. And their only hope is, are people still talking about me above ground? When Odysseus goes down, that's what they ask. Are they still talking about me? That's it. The most you can hope for is people will still remember you. That's it. That's not much. So what struck me when I read it was that note of nihilism, saying, wow, this is how we started with this note of nihilism.
And a note of nihilism in a foundational text. It's the very beginning of the written word.
Literally, the Greeks reinvented.
Literally.
They first had this thing called Linear B, which is a very clunky script. It was an adaptation of a lost Cretan script. That went nowhere. That, in fact, was alive during the time of the Iliad. They would have had Homer and makes one reference to writing, but he never exploited it because to him it was it's a little gimmick. It's like a computer. Well, I have a computer where you can just speak. The word will always be immortal. So he discounted writing as being just a little gimmick, a trick that wouldn't have any future. Then 400 years later, they reinvented writing by tinkering with this Phoenician script. And the very first book they decided to write, it was this Iliad. And if you think even the Odyssey, which is a very entertaining thing, but is also deeply despairing, it takes the guy 10 years to get back to his wife. And then he's got trouble at home.
Big time.
Big time
Big
trouble.
time.
Yeah. It's a
Trouble at
mess.
home.
It's a mess. A lot to clean up. So it was just struck at the emotional tone being so despairing. And what struck me is, as you said, this book, in fact, was the backtracking from a key line at the end. At the very end, I don't think it ruins it by reading it to you. At the very end, there's this line that Harlow, the scholar, his conclusion at the end, because there's also a consistent talk of the other foundational myth of the West, which is the Gospels. And so he compares the two, and he says, I'll read 2 paragraphs. Troy, Jerusalem, so as Jesus. Contrary complements. Stories that are at the start and heart of Western culture. Our founding myths. The first, the oldest, offering redemption through poetry. The second, the latter, salvation by faith. For both we have mere wisps of evidence, then stories, then the Greeks and the Christians. The creation is of the same form. Wisps, stories, a people. And so the conclusion. Life is a walk. And while our bodies are solid, our joints are strong, and our vision is clear, yet we walk on feet of dreams. We walk on feet of dreams. I was struck at how these foundational myths, foundational stories, Jesus and Troy, have no factual evidence. Doesn't mean they're not true, but they don't exist in history the same way, let's say, that George Washington lives in history. There's no facts behind a Trojan War whatsoever. There is a place called Troy, south of Istanbul, called Hisarlik now. It's quite a disappointing historical site, but there it is. It's 9 layers.
That's so sad.
Yeah.
I really want to go to Troy back in the day.
Well,
you know what I mean?
You don't want to meet your heroes because they always disappoint.
Yes, this is true.
Troy's one of them.
Troy would, okay.
Troy's one of them. And the same thing with Jesus. There's very little historicity to him. Doesn't mean he's not true, but it's not a truth accessed through facts. It's accessed through story, through something else, through going beyond the rational. So these two sort of quote-unquote myths, and yet they're foundational to who we are. I was struck by that here we are, this incredibly powerful technological society, and yet we walk in feet of dreams. And I think it's not just our civilization. I think us as individuals also sort of walk on feet of dreams. That mixture of fact and fiction that has always interested me. I think we're all like that. Yes, there are facts that attend to us that are important. We don't want to live lies. We don't want to be lies. But we go way beyond those facts and enter sort of a dreamscape where we ideate, we imagine our lives, we imagine stories about our lives, and in fact, those are our lives. And so we also walk as individuals, I think, on feet of dreams.
It does seem like I want to talk a little bit about sort of what an epic is and the language of a traditional epic poem versus the language we have here. And so tell us just briefly, what is an epic poem and how is this one different?
Well, traditionally an epic poem would be something spoken, it was oral. Hence this meter. The Iliad and the Odyssey were written in the dactylic hexameter, which works very well in ancient Greek, apparently. It doesn't work at all in English. You have very, very few. There's one translation, one English writer, I forget his name, who translated it. It's unreadable, apparently. Iambic pentameter works more. Hence Emily Wilson's in the iambic pentameter. You have other translators who use the iambic pentameter.
Which is what Shakespeare used.
Which Shakespeare uses, that
Except
one.
for the fairies in A Midsummer Night's Dream. They don't speak in iambic pentameter. But
Oh, I didn't know that.
No.
What do they speak in?
I think they speak in iambic tetrameter, and it's not a differentiation anyone would know, except it might sound a little different. So the fairies sound a little different.
Only them.
Only them.
Did not
Anyway,
know that. Well,
that's an aside.
I gave up on that because I cannot write in iambic pentameter. I wanted free verse. because after all, people sometimes feel intimidated by classics. I myself put off reading it for decades, thinking, I don't want to climb that mountain. In fact, it's a very climbable mountain. In fact, it's a mistake to read the Iliad like you would a traditional novel. It's not like Middlemarch. It was meant to be spoken. And just if you go to a church, you're not going to get the entirety of the Bible read to you. You don't have time for that. You don't have 3 weeks to spend in the church to be read the entirety of the Bible. You get a small segment that is then commented on. In a sense, the epics would have been like that too. They would have been recited at feasts, but not the entirety of it. It'd be one scene. First, everyone would be familiar with the story. In a sense, like with the Gospels, you're usually familiar with it. It's just a retelling. You're being told again and you're having it analyzed. You want that patina of familiarity. Same thing with the Iliad. It would be recited at a feast, but only one scene or two scenes. So the best way, I think, to read it now is it's the ideal bedside book. You read it just for a few minutes. You read one scene or two. So traditionally it's 24 books. Read a book over the course of a week maybe. So you savor it. And it is oral. It's nice to read it out loud, to get into that sort of cadence that the bards did. So it's slightly to betray the work to put it in a book. Now, I am a writer, so that's why I wanted free verse. I wanted something that was easier to read, that you would be pulled throughout. And I didn't want to sort of the reader to feel, is this the iambic pentameter? Am I supposed to get it somehow? I want it to be an approachable text in exactly the same way that Homer at the time would have been extremely approachable. Everyone would have understood him immediately. There would have been just as Shakespeare at the time would have been, Hamlet and all that would have been understandable by people who were barely literate. They would have just got it right away. I wanted that similar effect here. I did not want people to dwell too much on the meter. So free verse is still a kind of verse, but I didn't want it to be limiting in some way. I wanted it to just flow.
Right, and I think one of the things about that struck me, and I think this is in a footnote of Harlow's, is that epic. What you don't get in an epic is anyone second guessing themselves. There's no interior life. And what you've done in this book, and I want you to talk about that, is you've not only brought the epic to the common man, because most epics are told from the vantage point of the blue bloods, the royal people, the important people, the 1%. And everybody else is just there for 10 years. Footnotes, right? But we do have this footnotes. And can you talk a little bit about Soaz, who is this, the hero of the fragments of the epic, and Harlow, and how they are similar, because there is this white space. When you open the book, you literally see the top of the fragments of the poems, and then all of the Harlow and a lot of commentary are in the footnotes. How do those two things play together?
Well, you look at the past, you can't look at it just for its own sake as an entertainment, let's say, the way we might in the Arthurian legends, but a really useful thing of looking in the past to see how does it illuminate the present. How many ways have we evolved, and in what ways have we not evolved, in what way are we repeating ourselves? So the usefulness of looking at the Iliad and the Odyssey is how it reflects on our lives today. So I wanted to tell two strands that would be in parallel, the past commenting on the present. And initially, I guess the conventional way of telling the story would have been to have continuous prose with telling the story of a scholar who discovers this lost epic and serves it up on a platter every few pages at his convenience. But then it would have been awkward because there's a lot of things I wanted to say, and it would have been tiresome, I think, to the reader to have all these asides and things served up at his convenience every day he goes to work, whatever. It just seemed very awkward. So I thought, why don't I said, split the page. And that happened extremely early on. I don't remember wanting to tell the story any other way but in this divided way format. And it worked for many ways for me. First of all, I like giving a starring role to footnotes. I like footnotes, those little asides, those little bubbles that are essential. And
they're sort of gossipy. It's
they tell his story.
They tell his story, and you feel like you're sort of back in reality. It's a nice back and forth.
Exactly.
Please continue.
And that's what I wanted. I wanted
Right.
a dialogue between the past and the present, and I want them to reflect each their own nature. So as I said, at the top you have this verse that feels ancient, that is supposed to be ancient.
But it's funny.
And it's funny.
But it's funny. A lot of stuff happens. It's action-packed.
Well, as
right?
an epic would be.
As it would be, yes.
And at the bottom, I had these footnotes, and there's one lovely line that I like in my own book, is, we're all footnotes to a greater story. And I think that's very true. We all live our little atomic lives. Sometimes we magnify them, we think they're very important, but sometimes we're pushed aside and we feel, oh, well, I'm nothing. And but yet, all these little atoms are at the source of everything. Our little private voices finally, like all your little American voices finally are the whole American choral work. Each one of us does matter. Whether we're important or not, objectively, there is no objectivity. We are all important and we all form. The 300 million atoms make the American society, just as the 30 million Canadian atoms make Canadian society. So I wanted those to be, so what I like about the format is you have this ancient verse here, and then these little footnotes that are all, what was great about the footnotes is each allowed me to tell something different, because after all, it's in the nature of a footnote to be its own little world. One footnote and then the next one don't necessarily have anything to say to each other. They refer to different parts of the text above them. And so I like that. It allowed me to say very different things side by side in a way that in a straight narration wouldn't make sense. It would be too discontinuous. And also, I just like the symbolism that you have this text that is suspended, that is held up by these footnotes. Without the footnotes, it would crumble in a sense. And without this, the footnotes would have no sense. They both need each other. They live in a symbiotic relationship. I like that. And I like the space. I was afraid initially that it wouldn't work. But I find it's kind of like a respectful dialogue, that one speaks and the other is quiet, and when the other one at the bottom speaks, the other one on the top is quiet. I like that alternation. I thought it was remember I talk about feet. Well, it's kind of like the top of the page is the left foot, the bottom of the page is the right foot, and you sort of walk your way through the text. So, and why the commoners? Just because it came natural to me. I'm a son of the middle class. My parents worked for the government.
We're all Harlow done, sort of. Most of us are.
Yeah. I went to public schools.
Right.
And in modern times, the base unit of a society is the citizen. Whether you live in a democracy or a dictatorship, the key unit is the citizen. So it felt natural not to speak from the point of view of a blue blood, of a multi-billionaire. I have no sympathy for that. But
that gets back to my initial question, which is like, it does feel like pardon the phrase, a call to arms for common people.
Absolutely.
There is that in this book because this is the common person, right? And it's like, it's a guy with marriage troubles and on the bottom of the page, and a whole lot of people with one marriage problem on the top of the page. I mean, my God, it's about a marriage.
Well, these are Greeks, they don't get along. They don't get along with anyone.
I'm telling you. But I do think, and I also think that the footnotes, what I loved is, and I wanted to ask you about this, because a lot of your texts, a lot of your books are like this. The footnotes have maps, and they have drawings of giraffes and chameleons, because there's animals in these fragments, because all of your books have animals in them, and animals are important. But it makes it feel for the reader like you're also doing the research. You read the poem, and then you're down on a footnote, and then you realize you're reading. You have to go back and forth. It's almost like you, the reader, are in the library. Like you're like, now wait a minute, what was that line? And this is a reference to this line, but it's not on this page, so I've got to go back. And so it feels
I was hoping readers would do that.
Participatory.
Yes, exactly. It's a co-creation. And I, in fact, sometimes the footnotes is very obvious why they're there. They very obviously refer to something. I don't presume that you've read the Iliad. After all, I didn't. So there are explanations of the Iliad and the Trojan War early on. And sometimes there are references to the Soad, which is this lost Trojan War epic. So some are like academic, pseudo-academic, and some are personal. And to me, what was interesting is sometimes it's very obvious why there's a footnote. It's very clearly an explanation for something that needs explaining, let's say, about the Iliad. But sometimes when it refers to Harlow Dunn's life, the Canadian academic, it's more elliptical as to why this little episode of what Harlow's life is started by this reference in the Soad. You have to sort of, so that's another thing I liked, is this is in a sense a deconstructed story. I've broken it up into the original story and then the contextual story, and you have to bring it together. And some of the work the reader has to do is to try to understand why sometimes a footnote uses a particular line as its referent. And both, as you said, to go earlier, yes, both are commoners. That came to me naturally. Would I vote for that billionaire tax in California? Yes, I would vote for that billionaire tax in California. Not that I wrote this for any current reasons. I wrote it because of this discovery of this book. But yes, I do believe in egalitarianism. We do better as a society when there's not too much discrepancy. There's always going to be some discrepancy because obviously some people are going to be brighter than others, harder working, luckier, and that all has to be taken into account. But you can't overstrain the distance between the two, between the poorest and the richest. It's just not good for society at all.
I want to talk about Hades because Hades walks onto the battlefield, and it's kind of remind me because Hades walks onto the battlefield and talks to Soaz at some point, and it's kind of Hades. It's kind of his daily constitutional. It's
he misses his wife.
He misses his wife. She's not there for 6 months of the year, right? For 2 seasons, and so he's just out walking, and he has like an invisibility cloak or something on, so only Soaz can see him. It's all kinds of fun stuff, but so he is one of the things. He's the god of the dead, the underworld, and wealth. I love how the dead and the underworld and wealth are all put together in a god. I just need
all
to say
that gold and diamonds, they're all underground.
It's all bad, right? But one of the things, he's sort of the smartest person in the room, in my reading, or a very interesting character. And he talks about how there's no anger in the underworld, there's only grief. And he says, life is a delicate invention of the heart. Why wreck it? Why can't we all just get along? I mean, that's the...
Hades is an interesting god because, first of all, he's the only of the major Greek gods who's unworshipped. You don't find Hades temples. He was also, in the original tradition, had no children. He didn't cavort like all the other Greek gods. But what's interesting, he's the only Greek god who's mentioned in Christianity. He's referred to several times in the Gospels, and even in the mouth of Jesus. He refers to, and you will build this church against the gates of Hades. Even the gates of Hades will not prevail. It struck me as incredible that one religious tradition, because usually religious traditions are realities unto themselves. They're exclusive worlds. Even if they're like Hinduism, which is quite happy to gobble up other gods, it's a tradition unto itself. And so to have one tradition refer to another entirely different tradition, I thought that was very interesting. It's as if gods were speaking and sort of passing the baton. So it's funny that the only god mentioned would not be, you'd think that maybe out of the mouth of Jesus might be not necessarily Aphrodite, But, could have been Aphrodite, could have been Athena. But the only god who's mentioned, not Zeus, not Poseidon, is Hades. I thought this sort of overlap was very intriguing. And he is a god who's very sober, because he's the one who does the best business at Troy, after all. And he's a god who's very unlike all the other ones. All the other ones are slight caricatures of the human psyche.
He's an outlier.
He's an outlier. He's very different from the others. In Homer, in the Iliad, which is the Greeks, the gods are there all the time. I mean, Zeus is there, Hera is there, Athena is there, Hephaestus is there, Hermes is there, Ares is there, and they're all there, battling, arguing. Hades makes one single appearance in the Iliad, and it is only to scream. The battles above ground are so tumultuous that he's afraid that the earth is going to collapse and the underworld will be revealed, and so he screams in protest. That's it. That's all you hear from Hades is a scream, not even a word, a scream. So I just thought, here's this outlier, exactly. And I thought, who most likely, we're all going to meet Hades at one point, but who would a soldier most likely meet on the battlefield in a realistic way? But Hades. And so, there's this conversation between Hades and Soaz towards the end of the book.
You mentioned a couple minutes ago the idea of legacy, the idea that Odysseus is like, are they talking about me? Are they still? And part of me, I think that this book also, in a way, deals with legacy, because you could also. I just want you to. I want to see if my interpretation is right. I want you to tell me, yes, that's what I meant when I wrote that. But I think the top is the public life. It is our public life. It is what is recorded. It is somebody telling the story of a big event that happened. And as we know, only certain people get to tell stories, right? And on the bottom is the private life. And the play between those two things struck me as the difficulty we all have being social, being on social media, and also just being with ourselves and managing our personal lives and our families, the people that we love. And then this idea, especially as we get older, it's like, what am I leaving behind? What am I leaving? Is there anything to that?
Yes, that's what I meant.
No, you're not this. All right, we're done.
No, but it is. You said many things there that fit perfectly. You're perfectly right that the fragments above, in a sense, are the public-facing part of the book, and the footnotes are, in a sense, it's like us. You go to work, it's your public. You're a dentist when you're.
You put your jacket on.
You put your jacket, and you perform as a dentist, as a professional. Your own personality is not to be seen particularly by your patients. You're supposed to be there as a dentist. It's at home that you take off the dental suit and you are yourself. So in the same way, in this book, you're right. The top of the half is the public thing, this grand epic, and in the bottom you have these sort of more personal, private, and this perhaps shameful things where, Harlow's deficiencies are shown, the difficult relationship with his wife, the tragedies that afflict him and what he makes of them or what he doesn't make of it, his failings. And they are in these little bubbles called footnotes, which are so easily to ignore. How many of us read books and don't look at the footnotes? So you're right, so you're right, it is the public and the private, the public facing, the private facing. There's many aspects of that I thought were very good. And in terms of legacy, one of the questions that I was struck in the Iliad is they ask so early on questions about the worth of work, which I remember reading in Hinduism. In the Bhagavad Gita, there's talk about work, the worth of work, how work is important, but how do you live with it and all that. It's not something that strikes me as much in Christianity. And here in the Iliad, you see that the ancient Greeks ask themselves, is this worth it? We're talking the blue bloods here, the ones who have all the skills, and there's a famous dialogue between Sarpedon and Glaucus where they say, why are we here? Why don't we just go home and live longer lives, quieter lives? Well, our soldiers admire us, they give us food, they give us honor, so we have to be there for them, and also we must earn kleos and time. So there's a question, we're talking 3,000 years ago, of is our work worth it? Is our efforts worth it? There's one, I should remember this, I've mentioned it several times, but I've forgotten his name. One of the characters, minor characters that Homer mentions, there's 700 of them in all. One of them is a character who is told by a seer, if you stay at home, you will live longer, but you will die of a painful disease. But you will live longer, or you can come to Troy and die quickly. Which do you want? And it's interesting, the character comes to Troy, and he dies at Troy. Because he said, well, if I'm going to die, first of all, I don't want to die a painful death. Well, by disease, I'd rather be stabbed, and the deaths are very brutal in Troy. So it's pretty ugly deaths anyway. But one is quicker, sooner but more meaningful maybe, and not done in anonymity. And he chooses to die a quicker but more vivid death at Troy. So to me, you have people that long ago asking, is my work worth it? And to be honest, it's something that I ask myself as a writer. How many times I have 4 kids, and when I was working on my book, my partner's going out with our 4 delightful little kids to do something really fun while I'm stuck with my book. I ask, is it worth it? After this, I'm going to Australia for 20 days. Of course, I'm really looking forward to it. I love Australia. I'm also going to New Zealand. You know, those marsupials, you can't beat them. But I will be away from my family, from my kids for 20 days. And a day away from your children is a day lost. You can't, my partner, we can FaceTime and we can make up, we can keep the connection going on FaceTime, but with your children, they don't have the patience, first of all. They don't want to talk to daddy. They're too busy, so they talk in 2 seconds, pass on the phone to someone else, and then phone ends up on the floor. So a day is lost. So is it worth it? Do I want it? But you have to balance the two, and we all have to do that, I think. Yes, you know, some reviewers have been saying that Harlow was sort of obsessed. And I say, well, no, he's not obsessed. It's a wonderful discovery. Imagine you're Howard Carter and you've discovered King Tutankhamun's tomb. You know, presumably you'll be late for supper that night. You've just discovered King. So to me, it's the same thing. You've discovered something beautiful. Writing a novel is a wonderful thing to be doing, to be creating a world, like gestating a life. It's a wonderful thing to do. So of course you're going to focus on it a lot. But there's a cost to it, and is it ultimately worth it? And that's one of the questions that it asks in the novel, is the worth of our work. What, you know, do we gain kleos and time, glory and immortality by, you know, holding on to our work? Is it worth it? It's one of the questions that it asks too.
I sort of touched on this, but I do want to ask you about what I believe is this kind of deliberate, poised instability and porousness in your books, you know, the idea of collaboration. And I think of Life of Pi. Probably a lot of people here have read Life of Pi or seen the movie or seen the play, but there's that moment as a reader where you're like, well, it's plausible. He could be on this boat with a tiger because his parents had they had a zoo in India. It's sort of like allegory and real. You know, you pushed us just as far as we could, but then Pi has a fever dream, sort of, and then there's an island, a carnivorous island, and you start to think, is he okay? He's starving, And I'm sounding silly, but I mean that sincerely. What that does to the reader is it puts you in a position of having to make decisions. And I think that you do that in a lot of your books. It's pretty brave. I mean, we don't walk away from this book and say, well, this is what you should do. You should not be Harlow Dunn. You should not, you know, because and I feel for him. He's a young guy with one child, and he's living in his head, and he's like in this old library at Oxford, and he's really excited, and things don't go his way. He is not doing the things, he's not doing the work he's supposed to have been doing, you know, and that's, I guess, part of it. But it's that moment, and so my point is, when we realize that he's kind of falling apart on the bottom of the page, then we start looking up at the fragments he's put together, and you, as the reader, are like, is this making any sense? Can I trust him to tell me this story? And then the whole thing becomes about what is a story, and what do we take away from a story? I mean, it becomes about storytelling.
Yeah, pretty well through all my books, I've been interested in this idea of the mix, of the interplay between fact and fiction. Because in a sense, as you grow up, that's what you learn about. You are taught facts in school, as one should. You can't be ignorant of facts and be educated. So you will be taught the facts of the world. You know, Washington, D.C. is the capital of the United States. Ottawa is the capital of Canada. It's useful knowing these facts, but if you think in your education, learning those facts is one thing, but then how you deal with the kid at your desk who's a bit of a bully, how do you deal with that girl over there who's kind of really pretty and you kind of like her but you're shy, those aren't facts, but they're just as important to who we are. You know, our education is ultimately not just factual, but also, in a sense, fictitious, impressionistic, emotional, psychological, aesthetic. And those two somehow interplay in the same body of who we are. So I've always been interested in fact and fiction, and in Life of Pi, you mentioned the island, in Life of Pi, I very late came to, I grew up in a completely secular household, completely, so we replaced all gods with art. If you want to understand life, read books, go to paintings, go to museums, listen to great music. That's how you understand life. And that was totally fine. I became a writer as a result of it. And then I got to India and I saw all these temples, and I said, what is this all about? How is this still existing in a time of computers and vaccination? How can there still be people believing in gods when you can't prove them? There's no empirical basis to them. What's that about? So I was interested, and I discovered this thing that, in fact, I should have been aware of, because as a writer, you want your readers to make a leap of faith. It's called suspending your disbelief, right? You start a novel, and if a novel works, you suspend your disbelief. So you start believing in Hogwarts, you start believing in Quidditch, you start believing in that, you've suspended your disbelief, even though I can tell you, I can promise you, no one actually plays Quidditch. It's against the rules of gravity. It just doesn't happen. But you don't care, and why is that? Because you've suspended your disbelief. Well, religions operate on the same way. It's just called a leap of faith. And both are based on the most flimsy of factual bases, or in fact none at all. There's no factual basis for Harry Potter at all. Millions and millions of readers have loved it, and it's influenced their lives. Same thing with Jesus, who there's very few facts about. I love pointing this out, that some things have a lot of facts, and we believe in them. There's a lot of facts about George Washington, and Americans love George Washington. First president, very important president. Million facts, million stories. Teeth, all kinds of, what's that thing about the tree? There's all kinds of stories. In addition to being genuinely important, he's sort of, in an entertaining way, important because of his teeth and this. What's the thing about the tree? Cherry tree. He's going to cut it down, or he was not going to cut it. Anyway, something about a tree. I vaguely remember this. But so lots of facts, lots of stories. But what happens if you shrink the facts? What if there are fewer facts? Do you therefore have fewer stories? What I found interesting, and it has to do with me as a writer, is you have some cases where there's very few facts, but that doesn't seem to matter. And the perfect example, in fact, is Jesus of Nazareth. And I say that whether you're a believer or not, as I said, Jesus does not exist in history the way George Washington does. I don't know why I picked on him, but George Washington does. We don't know when Jesus was born. He wasn't born on December 25th. That was decided 350 years later because they thought mistakenly that it was the winter equinox. So it was the day when the days started getting longer. What better day to have a God be born but the day when there's more and more sunlight brought to us? That's definitely the sign of a God. He brings sunlight to us. He brings us to life. So December 25th, a great symbolic day to have him be born. We have no idea when he was born. There is literally no birth certificate. We don't know when he died, after all. Easter varies year by year. What historical figure's date of death varies year by year? And most years we know literally nothing about Jesus. Most years of his life, what he did when he was 15, when he was 18, when he was 22. We know birth, 12 years old when he was forgotten in Jerusalem, his ministry in his early 30s. The rest we know nothing. And what we do know about him was told through oral tales. No one who ever met Jesus, I always find this interesting, no one who ever met Jesus, this was a highly literate time, right? This is 800 years after Greek philosophy. There's tons of stuff on Aristotle who lived 800 years before Jesus. No one who ever met Jesus ever wrote anything down that has survived. One of the sources of the Gospels is this thing called Q, which may have been based on witness statements. There possibly were, but those have all been lost. How interesting. You meet this unbelievably charismatic person, truly the most charismatic person ever born, and no one writes anything that has survived. No one says, I met him. He was, quite short, but, we don't know what he looked like. We always portray him as sort of understatedly handsome with a beard and long hair, like a hippie from the 60s. We have no idea. He might have been short and bald. I don't mean any disrespect, but we have no idea. These are all creations. So there's very few facts. And yet, if you told a Christian, we have very few facts about Jesus, would they slap their forehead and say, oh my God, I don't believe in him anymore? No, because they have story. They have story. And once you have the story, the facts don't matter. The facts are relativized, which in fact is the same thing with Donald Trump. Donald Trump...
You knew we were going to talk about him.
No, but I'm not being judgmental or ironic here. But if you like Trump, you will say he's accused of lying, and if you don't like Trump, you'll say he lies. But either way, he's kind of fact-free, right? And yet, someone who loves Trump.
Yes.
I'm sure there's someone in this audience who likes Trump. So I'll say, even if you love Trump, that doesn't matter to you. Why? Because Trump has a story. And that's, those of you who hate Trump, that's your difficulty. It's not disproving his facts that will get you anywhere, because he has story. And you can only kill a story by having a better story. And that's very hard to do. Coming up with facts is easy. You can just come up with a different fact, public policy, you can work it out. Coming up with stories is much more difficult. And that's the thing that he has that's unusual among U.S. presidents. In fact, I'd say quasi-unique, is that he has big-time story of disgruntlement, of resentment, of making America great. That clearly speaks to dozens and dozens and dozens of millions of Americans. And that story is very hard to dispute with facts. So like Jesus, it's story. It's story. And the facts at one point don't matter. And as a writer, I find that fascinating, that you don't need many facts. What you need is that bizarre thing called story, which has a mixture of emotional truth, psychological truth, aesthetic truth helps too. Hollywood with their handsome actors and actresses. All those things come together. And once you have that alchemy and it works, then suddenly the facts don't matter. And yet, that story, even detached from the facts, will then determine the facts that follow. Just as, you take Marx, and you Marxists will still try to do things based on these theories that are based on perhaps dubious ideas. Once you have a story, it's amazing what will happen with it. They will then start dictating what will happen next, even though there are few facts to it. So Christianity is an example of that. Troy, same thing. There's no historical evidence for the Trojan War. Yes, there's a place called Troy. We have zero evidence for any of the characters. It's not like we have a pottery with, the word Helen scratched out in ancient Greek. There's nothing at all. It's some invention. Clearly something happened in Western Anatolia. Clearly something happened, and the bards started singing about it, and it became the foundation of the West, of the Greeks, and therefore of the West, yet there are no facts. So as a writer, I'm interested by the flimsiness of facts, which once again, to me, speaks to who we are as human beings. I can find out facts about each of you, but those specific facts really are meaningless. It's what you make of those facts. It's the story you tell of yourselves. That expression, what's your story, to me is a really deep expression. If you want to know someone, you have to know their story. And their facts are... In fact, once you have their story, you'll forget about their facts. You'll forget their birthday. You'll forget where they were born. Because you have their story. Everything comes down to some sort of narrative creation about ourselves. And so as a writer, I've been interested in that interplay between the two. And in a sense, the leap of faith that you have to make and what it means. And generally, I find you're better for a leap of faith. You're better to make more of life than less of it. There's no triumph in getting to be 77, dying of cancer, said, I never believed in Santa Claus. I never believed in any gods. I never believed in any art, in any novel, because it was made up. There's no triumph in that. You want to make those leaps of faith and be better for it.
And the stories that are in this book, in the footnotes, Harlow talks about the difference. There is a comparison between. He argues that these fragments and that epic poetry led the way, allowed for the Gospels. But there's interesting points that I would like you to talk about how one of these stories is violence forward with love and family in the background, and the Gospels are love forward with the violence in the background. So it's sort of a bookend.
Well, that's what struck me. You have this ancient epic that survived for hundreds of years orally and then was finally written down and is deeply embedded in Greek culture. And then a few hundred years later, and a few hundreds of miles to the east, you have another story, same violent background. I mean, it was no better, it wasn't great shakes being a soldier at Troy, it was no great shakes being a Jew in Palestine. You were oppressed by the times, no medicine, no democracy, nothing, and you were oppressed by the Romans. So very rough times to be a human being. We're talking, just a few steps ahead of the Trojan War was during the Bronze Age, which was one step ahead of the Stone Age. Now by the time you get to the year zero, you're fully into the Iron Age, so it's a bit better technologically, but still very rough life, as arduous a life, and yet the emotional tenor of the Gospels, of that foundational story, is radically different, so radically different, and yet roughly the same time period, same rough life, totally different emotional tone, linked by the same language. Christianity was born in Greek. Even though Jesus spoke Aramaic, the earliest Christian documents are Paul's letters in Greek. He was a Greek-speaking Jew. All the Gospels were written in Greek, and none of them met Jesus. It was all told through Greek orality, the same language as the Gospels, as the Trojan War. So to me, they must have spoken. Now, do I have any historical evidence for this? No, but we, as I say twice in the story, we are talking myth here. And myths are malleable. Myths are plastic. They are meant to speak to us, which is why they do. We can interpret them for ourselves. Art and religion both are very individual things. In every religion that you can conceive of, God loves you. It's inherent in any religion that God will love you and that you matter. You're the poorest orphan in Calcutta. Vishnu will love you. And that's very deeply meaningful to someone who is suffering, that someone truly loves them. It makes a huge difference. Same thing in art. When you're looking at a painting, that painting in a sense loves you because you are looking at it, trying to interpret it. Both gods and artists, both religion and art, is all about magical thinking that speaks to the individual. And that's key important, and I've forgotten why I'm saying that. What was that? I've lost track.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
It's okay.
It is what I meant.
You're right. I want to just step back and talk a little bit about Life of Pi.
Oh, I do say, that's good.
Okay,
Myths
go
are
ahead.
malleable.
Go ahead.
Is you are supposed to play with them. So we don't know what happened at Troy. The bard started singing. We don't know what was with this Jesus of Nazareth. There clearly was a Jesus event, but we don't know. But people started singing, both in Greek, and that song continues to this day. And we are invited to co-create, just as a book is a co-creation. Two people will read the same book. One will hate it, one will love it. It's the same book. Well, because clearly you've brought something different to it. That's exactly the nature of magical thinking, is that you can appropriate it and make it speak to yourself, which you can see now recently with Greek myths. You know, there's this whole cottage industry of retellings of Greek myths, Song of Achilles, Circe, there's a whole bunch of those, Women of Troy, this retelling of this ancient story, once again to suit ourselves. We're in far more feminist times than they were 3,000 years ago. It was really rough then. And so there's this retelling now, this feminist retelling, and that's totally allowable because there are no facts out there. These are stories that we're allowed to change around so that they continue speaking to us. Because, and here's the point, you want that dialogue to continue. Just as God loves you and the painting loves you, you want that conversation, that connection to continue. Full stop.
Okay. So I want to ask about Life of Pi, and we talked a little bit about this before we came on stage. Life of Pi was published in Canada in 2001. It's 25 years old.
Since you're talking of the ocean.
Thank you for the sound effects. You must still hear from people reading Life of Pi after all these years. And how has it settled with you in the landscape of your life? You know, it's a big thing, and there are Booker Prize winning novels, and then there are ones that are made into movies, and then there's ones made into plays. But to me, what's more incredible is that your book is taught in Texas high schools. Like my son was assigned your book. That's really permeating the culture, right?
Yeah, no.
So how do you think about it as like a just wonderful child that you had that has gone off and done its own thing, or how
Yes.
does it sit with you?
You're right. That's exactly it.
You have to say more. Say more.
No, absolutely. No, listen, I wrote this book. Listen, I'm from Quebec, from French Canada, which is still a deeply secular culture. We had a thing called the Quiet Revolution in the early 60s, where a very Roman Catholic province threw that off, saying, why are we this religious? It's holding us back. It's holding the women back, the educational system back. Quebec was really a backward province. Anyway, in the early 60s, as a result of the 60s, the Beatles and sexual revolution and all that, literally the province in a few years completely went secular, completely. Everyone left the church. And my parents were of that generation. They were, as I said earlier, they were deeply, deeply secular people. So I only became interested in religion when I went to India. And I saw these manifestations, and I sort of wanted to write about it. But I was thinking, who's going to read this book? My parents are so anti-clerical. They hate religion. It held my family back. I mean, stories I could tell you about it. But anyway, I'm not going to start ranting. So I said, I can't write about religion. Who wants to hear about someone who takes religion seriously? We like our religion in, if you're urban, literate novel reader, if it's well soaked in irony and disdain for the bad things, the many bad things that religion does. But as I discovered in India, it's not only, religion isn't only about patriarchy, homophobia, anti-Semitism. There must be something else, because surely that much hatred can't survive for that long. What am I missing here? But nonetheless, I was worried that I would miss my reader because I would be taking Jesus and Allah and Vishnu and Krishna and all those other guys seriously. Because they are meant to be taken seriously. If you don't take it seriously, there's nothing to take. So I have a character who takes that seriously, and then to make it even worse for this novel, I'm talking about zoos. And most urban novel readers in Canada don't like zoos because, like religion, they're jails. Jails for animals, jails for people. I'm talking about two jail systems. Who's going to read the book? So I wrote this book as I wanted to. I was my first reader, and I also liked what I was reading. But I thought no one would read this. It takes religion seriously, and it takes zoos seriously, and it's kind of an adventure story, but it has a philosophical component. It's going to miss all the sort of target audiences that a publisher might want to hit. So when it was turned down by a great number of publishers in the UK. Finally, one small enthusiastic publisher in Scotland Not even in London, in Scotland. I thought,
Of
really,
all places.
I'm being published in Oblivion here, being published by a Scottish publishing house that usually specialized in mountain climbing books. So
That's awesome.
I was thinking, okay, whatever, they're the only ones that are really enthusiastic, I'll go with them. And it did well enough in Canada. It started well enough in Canada. Readers were puzzled. Reviewers couldn't, it's not for children, even though there are animals, and usually animals are for children for some reason. And it does talk about religion, which does make us nervous, but it's not evangelical. It's not a Christian novel, because he's also a Hindu and a Muslim, so that's kind of weird. But it does talk about zoos. It's kind of interesting, and it's, it's set at sea, but it's kind of weird. Anyway, there was praise, but it was slightly muted because they couldn't quite place it. But then it started doing well here in the United States. People were less judgmental, more open. It started doing really well, and it did really well in the UK. It did way beyond my expectations. I still am delighted and puzzled that it's done so well. And what's wonderful is how people have taken it on as their own story. After all, as a writer, you're kind of an engineer. Like the guy who did the Statue of Liberty was the same guy who did the Eiffel Tower. Gustave Eiffel was the engineer for the Statue of Liberty. And I imagine when he was doing the Statue of Liberty, he was just concerned that she not fall over, that the arm don't fall down, that she not topple in the wind. His concerns were purely of an engineering nature. How Americans would take the Statue of Liberty, or how all those immigrants that made your country would take, that was not his concern. In the same way with writing The Life of Pi, my concerns that I remember when I was writing it were primarily of a technical nature. It can't be like a fable. It can't be like The Little Prince. It's got to be gritty. So I did my research about, castaways and zoos and animal biology and zoo behavior and stuff like that.
And what you might have on a boat.
What you might have on a lifeboat. I did
Right.
my research. It would feel verisimilitudinous. I wanted to feel realistic. But how the reader would take it was not my concern. So I remember when it started becoming successful, and lo and behold, I got invited to places, which never happened to me before. Usually, when you write a book in Canada, literary fiction, you give it off and there's a thundering silence. Here I was being invited, and people would ask me questions like, what does Richard Parker mean? What does he mean to you? And I'd be like, blank stare. Like, I have no idea. Like, what do you think he means? And then insightful readers, well, he could be God. That's good. That's a good one. It could be this, it could be that. And so I'll give you a concrete example. Pi is at sea for 227 days. He had to be at sea a certain number of days, and clearly a castaway would eventually account for the number of days they'd be at sea, just to figure that out. So there had to be a number. It couldn't be random, because that would be unsatisfying. So I chose a prime number. Not great at mathematics, but I remember prime numbers can only be divided by themselves, 227, or 1. And I like that because there are two stories in Life of Pi, one with animals, one without. I didn't want people to have a cafeteria approach. Well, they'll take the orangutan, but they'll take this from the other story. No, you either take one story or the other. The stories, in a sense, are prime numbers. Now, that's to me. Are you going to get that as a reader? No way. You're not going to get that. But it's my private symbolism, 227. I did a reading where someone said, why did you choose 227? I said, well, it's a prime number. I thought that was good enough. They said, oh, and they looked disappointed. So I said, well, what do you have? Why do you think it's 227? Oh, well, 22 divided by 7 is pi.
What?
Yes.
That's crazy.
It's the closest fraction to pi. I didn't know that. But I can tell you the next reading, why do you choose 22? Well, it's a prime number and 22 divided by 7. So I got more insightful about my book as I went along. And I'll tell you another one. I had another reading where a woman said to me, in your novel, a boy looks after the tiger, feeds the tiger, cleans up after it. They live in a tense cohabitation, and they reach Mexico, and the tiger leaves without saying goodbye. Is this a metaphor on marriage? And I said, it is a very domestic drama. It's a very bourgeois domestic drama, two people stuck in a confined space. But no, I never thought of it as being a metaphor on marriage. But, once again, I passed that along. Well, it could be a metaphor on marriage, So all these people started reading the book for me and co-creating and passing that on. And I think that's remember I said how things are personal. It's all about connection. Mm-hmm. God loves you, the painting loves you. In a sense, a book that speaks to you like that, in a sense, becomes your book. And I had any number of letters from people who went through trauma, cancer, abduction, who happened to have read Life of Pi at that time, and their adversity became personified as Richard Parker. And so, it's very gratifying to hear that. So I'm still grateful. It's not I love my books are like my children. I love all my children equally. I love all my books equally. I feel as passionate about every single one of them. This one happens to do exceptionally well, and I'm delighted. It's kind of moved on. I live in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. None of you, if I showed you a map of Canada, could pinpoint where Saskatoon, Saskatchewan is.
He left the snow to come here.
I love the snow. He left the snow. So I live in the middle of nowhere quite happily, and Life of Pi is sort of was a delightful part of my life. I haven't entirely left it behind. I still receive letters from people about it, and I'm grateful for that. It's funny, sometimes I get, you said your son did it in high school, sometimes I get packages of letters from a teacher who assigned it to their student and said, you're going to write a letter to the author. And I can tell that the teacher didn't read every single essay.
Oh, man.
Because some are, yes, dear Mr. Martel, I really liked your book, but then, little Johnny there, the 27th essay, he didn't like Life of Pi. He didn't like Life of Pi. And the teacher didn't notice that. She didn't pull that letter away. So it's interesting. I get letters from readers who didn't like Life of Pi. So yeah, I'm still surprised and delighted that it's done so well. But in a sense, that's the book. It's left me behind, and I've moved on to other stuff.
Did it give you, as a writer, you wrote, I think Beatrice and Virgil was the next one, and then you wrote The High Mountains of Portugal, and now Son of Nobody. Did the success help you in any way? Did it affect you? Did you say, I'm really just going to explore, or did it have any impact on you? I wonder, when you have something that really sort of catches on, do you end up looking at the world thinking, oh God, what do they want now? Or do you just not worry about that as a writer?
Did. I mean, listen, it made my material life easier. It sold very well, so now I don't have to worry about paying for my children's education. For that, I'm very grateful. But otherwise, it hasn't changed me at all, because every book is a new book with a new question, new doubts. You know what? Success as a book, famous to a person, may possibly magnify your strengths, but it doesn't make your weaknesses go away. They remain the same. As a writer, they remain the same. And especially if you're trying a new project with a new question, does this work? How do I fix it? The same blindness, same insight. So as a writer, it hasn't changed me at all. And in fact, after the huge success of Life of Pi, Beatrice and Virgil is about the Holocaust, which is not a topic that usually has immediate commercial appeal. People are interested in the Holocaust, but the approach I've discovered is slightly dutiful. It's not an entertainment, obviously. So my publishers weren't necessarily happy that my next book was about the Holocaust, but it's a topic that's always interested me. I'm not Jewish, I'm not a German. I have no relationship with the event, but growing up, I lived 10 years in France, so I went to school in France. And they taught the Holocaust. And whereas as a child, every war fits nicely into this sort of childish glorification of it, kids play war. Then you're taught the Holocaust, and it didn't fit. Kids don't play Holocaust. There's something about the Holocaust that stood out, so it's always stayed with me. Periodically I've read the big books that occasionally come out. I remember a few years ago this magnificent diary by a man named Victor Klemperer, who's a Jew, a professor, and he managed to stay in Germany through the entirety of his war, pretending not to be a Jew. And he kept this diary, and it shows you in granular detail the reality of living on that. Toothpaste with swastikas on it, and just the complete cultural penetration of Nazism. And so I read that when it came out. The big movies that come out, when I went to Jerusalem for Life of Pi, went to the Holocaust Museum. I would have gone to the Holocaust Museum here, but it was closed. So I decided to write on that because you have to follow your muse as a writer, and I just wanted to write not so much about the Holocaust, but its representation. How do we talk about an event like that? How does it live in history? How does it live in art? How does it live in language?
Mm-hmm. And then really you do an interesting exploration of Christianity in the high mountains of Portugal.
Right, that one.
There's a lot of secular religious exploration.
Yeah, well, that one. See, that's the book, in fact, that changed the most in the writing process. Initially, High Mountains of Portugal came with the idea. If you remember, those who are familiar with the Gospels, there are these little mini chapter headings that aren't in the original text. They were added later on for ease of reading. These little mini chapter headings. I decided, what if I wrote a novel where I took the chapter headings of the shortest gospel, which is Mark. I took also because after all, the narrative arc of Jesus is the narrative arc of every life. We are born, we live, and then we die. So the gospels reflect that. They start with the birth, and then they end with the death, very obviously. So I thought, can I write a novel where I take the chapter headings of those mini chapters? I think they were forget how many there were, 83 in Mark? Anyway, I took the shortest one. Can I write a story that would somehow directly reflect that title or depart from it in some sort of ironic sense or some sort of a more elliptical sense? So initially in High Mountains of Portugal, yes, the structure was just those mini chapter headings but then it evolved and changed. But yes, I was trying to look there at what we do with the sacred. What happens? How do you keep the sacred alive? Because that's one thing that I've noticed, that as we age, one thing that never ages is faith. Whatever, it could be faith in a football team, not necessarily in any faith, in a truly
Not in
loved
the
one.
Tottenham Hotspur soccer team. Not now.
No,
anyway.
not them. Not them. Not them. Then some other team. But whether it's a faith in a team, in a person, in a movement, and whatever, that's one thing that doesn't age. If it's a really well kept alive faith, and I was interested in looking at that. How do you take something sacred and have? So there's 3 parts in the High Mountains Portrait, each a different faith object, and in this case, it's the symbol of a chimpanzee. And I wanted to look at that. How does it survive? How does it live best? So in a sense, the last part of it is the one who, the person who lives with the faith object, a Canadian senator who incongruously adopts a chimpanzee. He goes to a research station in Oklahoma, and ends up with a chimpanzee. It's made plausible in the story. And he moves to Portugal.
Like the tiger on the boat.
Yes, exactly. He moves to Portugal with this live chimpanzee, which is supposed to be a pet, but it takes over his life. Just as in the Gospels, Jesus appears and takes over the lives of people. So, and in reverse, then the earlier story, in fact, is much later when the faith object is gone. So I just wanted to look at that face of how do you keep faith alive. So, that was the High Mountain. Each of my books has been a different question. My first novel, which I can't remember if it's been published in the U.S., called Self, is a story of a boy who at age 18, once again while in Portugal, for some reason Portugal comes up in my books a lot, he's backpacking in Portugal and he metamorphosizes into a young woman. And he's a woman for 7 years, and then at age 25, she becomes a man again. So I was looking at what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, and I was just interested in looking at that. Just what is it? Just a curiosity. So each of my books has been a different question, and so each one is quite different because of that.
Okay, and just a few. I'm wrapping up here in just a moment. I wanted to ask you about Audible books. Do you listen to them? I mean, it seems like that's happening now. Everyone's listening to books, which is great, and this is a great book to listen to, because I think how it's handled is there's one voice for the poem, and then there's another voice for Harlow at the bottom, right? And do you listen to books?
I do. In the car when we go on road trips. I love audiobooks because, after all, language originally was oral. This writing is a late artifice, very effective, but language is oral. So audiobooks are fantastic now because they're so well done. The actors who play them, I mean, some writers are really good readers, most aren't, but when you get real actors, and you're right, they have 2 voices here, it's so well done, and slight sound effects. I think they're wonderful. They bring us back. Now, I find it's hard to listen to a really literary book, one with really long sentences. It may be a bit trying. But once again, well done, and if you're really focusing, I think they're wonderful. I love oral. I find an audiobook is as valid as the written one.
That's
I
good.
find they can be very, very effective.
Yes. And my last question is there another book that's, you're working on that's kicking around back here?
Well, more than kicking, it's been kicked.
Really?
Yeah, I had 6 weeks at one point when my Canadian editor was going to read Son of Nobody, and I happened to be in Mexico in a fellowship, and my family was with me the first week, and the second week I was alone, so what am I going to do? And suddenly I started thinking about my mother, who is 85 and has Alzheimer's. And I've lived with that for a number of years, so it's a lived experience. But in Mexico, for some reason, I started looking at it not as a son, not as a loving son, but as a writer. What imaginative reaction can I have to this phenomenon called Alzheimer's? So I wrote, usually I take years to write my books. In 6 weeks, I wrote an entire book about this. It's not a memoir, which I wouldn't find interesting. My mother's Alzheimer's, so many other people have Alzheimer's, so what? It's an artistic riff, so it's going to be an unusual book. I'm hoping this book does well, because this next one is really going to test my publishers. It's going to be published in a box, because it's a novel in 52 chapters, same number of weeks in a year, same number of cards in a deck of cards. Life is a game, So it's going to be published in a book, because the chapters are not bound. You can read them in any order you want. So they'll be as short as 1 face, or 2, or 4, 8, or 16. That's how it works. So it's a chapter in 52 booklets that you can read in any order you want. And depending how you read it, it'll, in a sense, be the same story, but be a different story. So, for example, one of the things I do in one of them is I discuss, there's a very, very well-known French short story called La Chèvre de Monsieur Séguin, Mr. Séguin's Goat. It's a very well-known short story in France. In one of the booklets, I translated it from the French into English. In another booklet, I comment on the punctuation of it and the style of it. And in a third booklet, I make another commentary on that same short story. So depending on how you read the book, you'll get that strand in a different order with a different impression, because there'll be other stuff in between depending on when you read it. Mm-hmm. At one point, I also refer to a short story of Kafka called Josephine and the Mouse People. Same thing, I refer it in different booklets. So depending how you read it, you'll get a different impression of that. And there's incessant cross-references. At one point, I refer to Yitzhak Shamir, who, if you remember, was a prime minister of Israel. I don't refer to him for any political reasons at all. It's just as you remember, those of us, when we, at the beginning of the AIDS crisis, Rock Hudson was the first famous person to have AIDS.
Yes.
That I remember, Yitzhak Shamir was the first person I heard of who was well-known who had Alzheimer's. He had it for a long, long time. And it was known. And that was the first person. That's the first time I read about someone out there who had Alzheimer's, was Yitzhak Shamir. So I refer to Yitzhak Shamir a number of times. There's incessant cross-references. Also, each chapter is one sentence, except for one chapter, which is multiple sentences. Now, I break them up in paragraphs because it's tiresome reading solid blocks. So it's broken up in paragraphs, but it's a single sentence. And sometimes the subordinate clauses don't immediately follow the main clause. So, in a sense, while you're reading about loss of memory, your own memory is being tested. Mm-hmm. While you're trying to make a sense of chronology, you're being presented with a mixed-up chronology. So the only chapter that has to come first is the first one, because it has the copyright page. Publishers like their copyright page to be soon. So the first booklet will definitely be there, but after that, they'll be in any order you want. And I had 3 boxes made and 3 printouts, and I gave to 3 different readers. And each one said, God, the order you sent it in was the perfect order. And I said, that was totally random. And they said, oh, really? And each one thought that the narrative sequence that they in their own minds constructed, because they just finally read it in the order that was there, even though I shuffled them, they thought that's the perfect sequence. I said, well, that's totally random. So I'm playing with randomness and loss of chronology.
And storytelling, again.
And storytelling, yeah.
Yes.
So that's the next book, and it's called The Forgiven and the Forgotten.
Okay.
And I like mentioning, because I've mentioned to so many people now that my publisher's got to publish it.
That's right. Thank you, Yann Martel. This was so fun. I really appreciate it. It's great.
Thank you very much.